Now, in true preparation, I left my glasses at home.
You want to borrow mine?
No, but I looked over there at that box and I saw Dragon's blood. So it got me a little bit worried. Dragan Vladicic, I have the privilege of leading the pre-sales team at Okta in the APJ region. I'm going to be doing a pseudo vendor speech. I'm going to be using Okta as an example as opposed to really talking about Okta per se. And where appropriate, we'll have transferable illustrations with Merrill and Azure AD or Stephen and Ping Identity as an example. So my title was Avoiding the Phishers. Adrian said be creative. And so the first part of creativity for me was, how do I create a logo? And I thought, well, I've never used generative AI, so let's see what generative AI creates for me. And that is my first generative AI image created. Now, it was a bit of an experience. Being a novice, I used the wrong tool. So the first bit of AI, I sort of said, I want an image for this, and it came back with the narrative there on the left, and I thought, nah, it's not exactly what I wanted. But no, I'm not going to draw it. So I then went to the next tool and plugged all that in, and that's where I got my image. In doing research for this topic, I found this other logo below the website, and I thought that would have been a better one to use. But for copyright reasons, I'm only going to refer to them there. Now, we've already heard a lot about the stats and the fact that credential attacks are on the rise. I'll stay here. Credential attacks are on the rise, and we've heard the different reasons for it. I've chosen to use not an Okta source. This is a hyper source in regards to their statistics, but I think it's been well discussed. The reason for it is they're all chasing the same assets you're trying to protect. They're all chasing your key employees. The employees that you're trying to, as Sue mentioned earlier today, trying to give a beautiful experience and a real-time experience so they can be more productive. Your customers that you're building trust and brand loyalty and generating revenue from. And finally, your supply partners or your partners. And we've seen all the risks associated with them. So that's what both hackers are trying to, or threat actors are trying to target, and at the same time, we're trying to deliver them a wonderful experience. And how do we balance the two? And I'm going to explore a little bit how do we balance the two. But if we take a step back for a moment, and in a very simplistic way, I'm not going to be a threat actor, but in the good old days, when phishing attacks were simple, our phishers would put up a website, we'd click on a link, we'd enter our credentials, they'd store those credentials and replay them. And we're able to mitigate that relatively effectively with multi-factor authentication. Worst case, that threat actor might have copied our OTP, but it was only good for a window of time, in which case those credentials and that OTP was no longer used if it wasn't used in real time. So over time, organisations have built a toolbox. I was going to call this the phishing toolbox, and then realised, actually no, that's the other people's toolbox. We wanted an anti-phishing toolbox, but it didn't make sense for me. So, as most organisations, what are the tools that we looked at to implement and to mitigate these threats? I know Alex is passionate about security awareness, but security awareness is probably one of the more effective controls. When done right, being able to educate and inform our users to recognise these threats, it goes a long way to mitigate them. When we look at phishing attacks, there are a lot of vendors out there that put out some really good simulation tooling as well. So to help teach our users to recognise those threats. But we all know we need layers of defence because, as Alex pointed out, we mere humans are always fallible to being lazy, going for the convenience, especially when we're down under. And so other controls that you might want to have in place are things like email defence and content and spam filters to mitigate that. I'm going to call it authenticators as opposed to multi-factor authentication, because I think something that we all need to be looking differently at is what are the authenticators that our users use. And Merrill used some really good examples of the different authenticators that are available in the industry. So the next set of tools, and obviously I'm going to touch on authenticators. The authenticators we do need to protect our endpoints. Because a lot of times, okay, I might come in through a phishing campaign, but as we also heard from Phil, our devices are susceptible too, so we need to be able to control and have visibility there. Adaptive access management. Now that we've got those other layers in place, we now need an access management solution that can look at those different contexts and make informed decisions. We call it adaptive access, Azure calls it conditional access. Essentially, we're all talking about largely similar things, but being able to make informed, intelligent decisions about how do I grant a user access and what level of assurance do I require to grant that user that level of access. And then the final one is automation and orchestration. Steve spoke about it in different terms, but with all these different signals flying around, we get the best outcome when we can ingest those different signals and make an informed decision. And when you go best of breed, you want that flexibility to be able to say, well, what am I getting from CrowdStrike? What am I getting from Mimecast? How will that impact my adaptive access decision? Do I need to make some other changes or orchestrate some other changes in my infrastructure as well? So these are all the different tools that a lot of organisations have in their toolbox. Open question to everyone here. What do you have? Do you use anything else different to help mitigate and control some of these credential attacks? Pregnant pause. CASB, yep, that's right. From a URL filtering, controlling the traffic that way, absolutely. And in the same way that we as vendors, you as customers and industry partners are trying to beat your competitors, well, the threat actors are doing the same, and it's an arms race. And if we look at it today, you might have all, we certainly all should have heard, because Microsoft did a really big publication about this earlier. We now have phishing attacks, which are and I've gone blank. Essentially, man in the middle, I've gone blank on what the A. Adversaries, thank you. Phishing proxies, where it's no longer a case of I'm interacting with a fake website. I'm actually interacting with my intended website. I'm supplying my credentials to the intended website with my MFA. So I'm doing everything that I'm meant to be doing, but the threat actors have got more intelligence. So they're now directing me through a proxy server. So my whole infrastructure, my back-end systems receives my authentication request, receives my 2FA, and then when it sends back the session cookie to say, yep, you are all good, because if you've proven everything, that's when the threat actor steals that cookie. And now they've got that authenticated session. And so now they can do anything that they want with my credentials, because for all intents and purposes, they are an authenticated user. So, with the adversary in the middle, phishing proxy attacks, how do we mitigate those? Well, there's a couple of steps. The first step is we do need to look at additional contextual data. We need to look at the IP address and the details of where it's coming from. But the most proven way is to use a phishing-resistant authenticator. And we've had a lot of chat about phishing-resistant authenticators, and I'm not going to profess to be more of an expert than Alex and the Ubico team are. But essentially, with phishing-resistant authenticator, we're leveraging both cryptography, we're binding our keys with the URL of the website that we registered the authenticator against. So what that means is, next time when I click on that link, because I failed my user awareness training, and I get redirected through the proxy server, and in this case the proxy server is quite obvious, it's called phishing.com, it might not necessarily be that obvious, but my authenticator has been registered against legit.com, I'm going to fail authentication, because my cryptographic keys have been signed against that target website, not the proxy. So as an end user, I'll see an error message. More importantly, my session data, my credentials are all protected. And the poor old Phishers walk away with, who's the next victim? And let's try the next victim. So we've heard today, and I'm using Okta here as an example, but what are some of the phishing-resistant authenticators available in the market? And we've got the FIDO2 web auth and authenticators, and they come in two forms. We've got the security keys, like YubiKey, who set the standard. And then we've got the platform authenticators, as Meryl was talking about, like Windows, hello for business, or my iPhone and Face ID. But at Okta as well, we've got Okta FastPass, which is also a device-bound authenticator that runs on the user's machine. Alex spoke about passkeys and the portability today of the new modern way of being able to transfer my authenticator across different devices. And obviously we've got PIF smart cards that are also reliant on certificates to provide that security. Each of the different authenticators provide varying levels of security. Certainly the YubiKey security key example is certainly the most robust and most portable. But they each have their pros, cons and merits. But there are some considerations. And one of those considerations are, which of these authenticators work for the best profile of my users? And I've got a caution rather than a cross, because I don't think anything is truly not applicable to a particular user community, but you've got some additional considerations. So I've split it up between workforce identity, external or customer identity. So my business partners or my consumers if I'm providing a consumer service. FIDO2 web auth and security keys, they're great for my workforce. They're effective for my external parties, but my consideration is the logistics of it. How do I manage the logistics of it? That's probably the consideration there. It's not saying that they're not an effective tool and you shouldn't use that tool in that use case, but they're to be considered in that perspective. Our device-bound authenticator, so using Face ID or using my Windows Hello, they very much are a universal authenticator, but they are device-bound. So the more devices I use, I've got to enrol those devices. I need to be able to make sure that my access management system is capable of supporting multiple devices. I have to manage that. Passkeys, I've got a caution for passkeys on workforce. And the caution isn't around security. The caution is, in some industries, you have a requirement, and Sue, I'm going to look for you. I don't know if you'll have the answer for me, but you have a requirement to be able to ensure that users are only accessing it from managed or trusted and known devices. In a passkey environment, my key gets passed to different devices that are all registered. So if I've got my Apple iPhone and I've got a corporate iPhone and it uses the same Apple ID as my home iPhone, I can pass my web auth and passkey to that. I still get all the security of it, but from a workforce compliance perspective, my workforce compliance team might say, no, that's not appropriate because that's not a managed device that you're using. So that's the caution really about passkeys and the workforce use case. But in the external customer identity, I think that is a great way, and more importantly, it should be the default standard to get rid of passwords. Let's just enrol our users with a passkey and run the method that way. Why do we need passwords? Similarly with Okta FastPass, great for the workforce, not really good for consumers because it's not branded. I can't brand it to my UniSuper experience, but I might be able to use it for my business partners and my supply partners because I can dictate to them a level of control. You need to access my systems, well, this is the method that you'll use to access those. And similar with smart cards. So that's from the authenticated perspective. And there are considerations that you would need to weigh the pros and cons and what works best for your environment. Unfortunately, and hopefully it's a point in time on the other side, but one of the challenges today that we have is not all applications today support, say, WebAuth and FIDO2. And more specifically, most of those applications are the native applications, native mobile applications. And the native mobile applications have been coded to use the word legacy web view. So they're not using the modern controllers that the iPhone provides or Google provides to develop, to write authentication into their app, but they're using the old web view technique, and those don't support WebAuth. So the other part that you need to understand in your environment is what are some of the applications. And although you're going to be all in on, I want that FIDO2 or I want those phishing resistant authenticators, you might need to build exceptions in your policy that say, for these legacy applications or for these native mobile applications, I need to have an exception rule that says these factors are what will be used to get that user's initial session. So some considerations, we're not quite there but we've certainly made, as we've heard in the discussion so far today, we've made some significant leaps and bounds in trying to mitigate phishing attacks. Now, from an Okta perspective, and I'll probably echo, I think it was Alex's comments earlier, which was there's no point having a strong YubiKey authenticator and then giving the user an alternate authenticator, which is SMS or just a simple Google Authenticator OTP. Really, and going back to that previous table, as you move into this realm, you really want to choose the authenticators that give you similar levels of compliance. Not just because that's what the threat actors will target, but also when you think about the use cases of, I need to replace my phone. How do I now enrol a new factor? If I just to enrol my new authenticator by using SMS, I really weaken my level of security. So by having my users use a consistent level of assurance, it does amplify the overall security that we have in place. So I said I'd use Okta as an example. Now, at Okta we provide a defence in depth approach, starting with policies. So policies are sort of the fundamental layer, but those policies are built on different authenticators. That ability to both get to that passwordless world, but also the ability to define, I want to use phishing resistant authenticators. You don't need to decide what is phishing resistant. Whatever the authenticators that you've enrolled, Okta knows which ones are phishing resistant and will enforce that policy based on that. The third level of defence is that contextual access. Looking at the risk signals, looking at the managed devices. Even if it's an unmanaged device, Okta can interrogate that device to work out its level of compliance and being able to make those contextual access decisions. And then the final one is observability. When we do see one of our users have thwarted a phishing attack, I might want to go back and look at the logs and see, have any of my other users fallen for that same site and they didn't use a phishing resistant authenticator? I might want to send my users some additional education and awareness training just to remind them you don't click on links. So the way some of that looks, I'm not going to talk about all this, but these are really some of the different layers. I don't think I've got a pointer, but really it's really that top one that I wanted to talk about, which was from a policy perspective, I can say I want to use a phishing resistant authenticator. It needs to be hardware bound, and that restricts it to all the ones that use the hardware security module on the device and a physical security key. But similar to Meryl's talk on ACSC and the different maturity levels, from an Okta perspective, we've aligned a lot of our terminology with NIST and their AAL, what they call authenticated assurance levels. And so you can build different policies and define, I need to have AAL level 3, analogous to ACSC maturity level 3. I need to have this level of control on these applications or for this group of users. So being able to put that in place. Now, unfortunately, some of us may not always be there, and had that question earlier today about what about push notification and push notification with challenge. That is an effective control, but it does rely on end user awareness. It does rely on the end user reading the details that is published there to see the request is coming from an IP address or URL that they're not present at. More often than not, users just play the number game and think, okay, let me see if I can guess the number. But security awareness is there. I spoke about observability, and this is an example of, and this is one of the differences as opposed to when you use the security key. When we use Okta FastPass, our back end gets an awareness that we've thwarted a phishing attack. And so in our back end system and in the back end logs, we'll generate that particular event. And that allows you to kick off an orchestration or kick off a particular workflow that you might want to do to mitigate those threats. And the way we do that, I won't step through all of these steps, but effectively looking at the bottom ones, the last three, when we return back our factor assurance, we send back a signed token, which also includes some of our device context, but Okta detects that the origin or the URL that you've registered your token, you're authenticated with, and URL that this is coming from are different, so that triggers the phishing alarm. The user gets a warning and will be, is warned that they were susceptible to a phishing attack, but because our back end is aware of it as well, we can run some other orchestration campaigns, and we can run some other workflows to generate that. I'm over my time.
You are at time.
I'm at time. That's perfect, because there's my last slide. No questions.
Spot on. Couldn't have timed it any better.